Hello everybody and welcome here this evening to talk about My Name is Climate and the panel discussion that we have on sustainability, climate change and how we can all personally make a difference. We have a fantastic panel for you tonight. I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves personally and to tell us a little bit about their qualifications and their area of expertise that they will be talking about today.
Hello, my name is David. My name is Climate Toke. I've been told to say that. And I am a long-standing green energy activist, and I'm also an academic and author of various books, including a book which has come out this week, which is Energy Revolutions, Profiteering versus Democracy. And perhaps I can say more about that in a minute. Over to you, Jackie.
Hello, I am Jackie State. I have been a member of various green activist groups since probably the 1970s. So I am a long-standing campaigner for green issues, anti-pollution, anti-plastic, all that sort of thing. And I am delighted to be supporting My Name is Climate tonight. My particular area of expertise, I am told, that I've got to concentrate on is clean water. I will say I have got a little bit of background in there because years ago I used to work for the Upper Tame Main Drainage Authority, which later became handed over to Severn Trent. So I do know a bit about sewage, and I am a wild swimmer as well, so particularly keen on clean water.
Hello, good evening. My name is Climate, and some people they call me Lalit Bhusal when they feel bored. So, okay, this organization, My Name is Climate, is designed by myself and all of my friends here. And through this organization, we try to humanize climate. So we want to connect people with climate because people don't see climate, and when it's a human behavior when humans see something and they believe on that thing actually. So we're trying to give them imaginary picture of climate. You know, they can feel it and then they can connect with climate. So that's the idea. And film festival, which we do, that is one of the projects we do every year. Apart from that, we do mindfulness sessions, which I don't think happens much with the climate change. And we have many other different projects which I will talk about later on. Thank you.
Thanks everybody. We've seen some fantastic films over the past 3 days all about climate, all about how things are changing and actually how terrifying it is. So I think if we pick out a few of those elements to address today where we can, I'd like to ask you first of all, David, you've obviously done a lot of research into climate change and sustainability. Could you give us some of your thoughts on what you've found about the research?
Well, I found that we need a mixture of social movements driving forward the right sort of ecologically and affordable, eventually at least, technologies. And we're moving very quickly in the world, in some places faster than others, towards an energy efficiency and renewable energy revolution. And I think there's a possibility, if we take the right action at a local, regional and national level, we can move towards a sustainable energy system that's affordable and one that avoids the terrible financial exploitation by the big oil and gas companies who have really soaked us over the past 2 years, making multi-billion, eye-watering profits. But we need energy democracy in a range of ways to generate such a good outcome.
And how do you think the average individual can help drive that forward? How can they make that happen for themselves?
Well, you can take action at an individual level, and you can also push for the right policies at a local and national level. Of course, as we speak at the moment, we've got a general election, so you can take part in that. I know I've been part of a Greenpeace campaign for the climate vote to get people to ask their candidates what are they going to do about climate policies, and also to put posters in their windows saying, I'm a climate voter. That's one little thing you can do, but we really need to do a range of things. Of course, what you can do at an individual level depends on the structures and the policies and the incentives that are available. So obviously we need to do a lot more to get a healthy coincidence of these two levels working together.
Jackie, if I could perhaps have you address the next question, please. We're seeing so much now. All the parties have got an agenda now. All the parties are saying that they want to address climate change. It's a political hotspot, isn't it? But obviously the Green Party and some other parties were there in the beginning, and they were, making great strides when nobody else was really talking about it. I know you have quite a political viewpoint. Would you like to explain where you're coming in at with regards to water?
Oh gosh, that's a rather roundabout question. I'm sorry. Sorry. Do you want to know about my political activism or about water? Both. Right. Okay. I think that although we've said that it's a climate hotspot, that the major parties are not doing enough about climate change. They are not, even the Labour Party has scaled back what they were going to do about climate change. And to be honest, there's not enough time. We're talking about something that's happening now and people are not recognising it. And if we don't believe that it's happening now, we can just look at the last winter that we've been having. Now, this is the wettest winter on record, and what we have seen is several storms come one after the other, And I was reading just very recently that with climate change, we can expect one of these really, really wet winters. This is just obviously from our country point of view. I know that every single country in the world may get different issues with climate change, but just from our country's point of view, we can expect one of these really, really wet winters every 5 years. And if climate change gets worse, it'll be every 3 years. So anybody that thought that maybe we were going to get a better climate in this country was completely wrong. Now, that wetness does have an enormous issue. You might say, well, how do we link climate change with water pollution? And the two are linked together in a way. First of all, if we get an excessively wet season, then what happens is that the sewage works cannot cope with the amount of water that's coming into them. It's partly because they're antiquated and they haven't properly got round to separating stormwater from sewage water. But it's also because if you get a dry time, they won't be discharging excess sewage. But this last year alone, 3.6 million times raw sewage has been discharged by the sewage companies or the water companies. Now, this is made infinitely worse by a wet season because, as I say, the sewage works then can't cope and they just let the sewage go straight out. And the other side of it is that then a lot of raw sewage going into the rivers then becomes a pollutant, and this pollutant also drives climate change because you will find that it kills off a lot of the wildlife. It may even kill the oceans are there, and they have the greatest carbon dioxide fixing ability of anywhere on Earth. And we could look to the oceans to fix all the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. When I say fix, I mean take it out of the atmosphere and into and make it into something which is not doing any harm. And from that point of view, again, sewage pollution does not help. So the state of our waters are very, very much been in the news lately, and hopefully the government will do something about it very soon, because this situation cannot go on any longer.
I'm guessing too that the statistic that you mentioned, those figures are probably the tip of the iceberg, because that's what we've found out about, that's what we know about. There's probably a lot more that goes on that we don't know about, unfortunately. What can people do? You know, are we talking about big businesses making a change, governments making a change, individuals making a change? What can we do to change this?
Are you saying what can we do to change the amount of sewage that's been put into the... I think we can only campaign. I mean, we are not in charge of the water companies. Unfortunately, that when privatisation happened, I can't remember how many years ago, during Margaret Thatcher's years, when privatisation happened, the sewage companies giving their investors dividends became above looking after the safety of the water issues. So again, it comes down to big business. And if we know that our water companies aren't even owned by English investors, they're owned by French and possibly German, I don't know, but a lot of them are actually owned by foreign government investors. And these people are making millions out of the water companies whilst they are polluting our seas and rivers. So again, we can't do anything directly, because they've got us over a barrel. I mean, we could do something a bit more directly, say with electricity, because we can go to a company and we want to kick and say, I only want green energy, and that's a possibility. And there are companies that will supply you with green energy, and it's 100% renewable energy coming into your home. But with water companies, I don't know. I think we need to put pressure for them to be renationalised, and also they need to have a massive amount of investments in their infrastructure.
Yeah, I think probably you're right, and accountability is the key. And I suspect that actually it doesn't really matter whether it's someone from overseas or someone who's in this country who owns them or who has, you know, the shares. I think it's the fact that they're not accountable, and possibly they don't care if they're not the ones who are actually consuming that water. So maybe something politically there about bringing it back to the end user, perhaps. Lalit, what do you see as the role of the festival with all of this happening?
The role of the festival is to connect with organizations who are fighting against the climate change in a different way, different manners. Like we went to Friends of the Earth, and we know there is Birmingham tree people as well. They are working all around in Birmingham, and many people, they are not aware of their story, and we are there in between, and we like to see their portfolio, what they're doing, the documentaries they will create, the story. So I think again, as I said before, it's a human behavior. They believe on things when they see, from this platform, I like to say to all the organizations, please create documentaries, short films when you are doing something. And the short film and documentaries or feature film is not all about the drama and action. There are true stories. Try to bring that out, and we are here to support you as a film festival. And we got right audience. They are coming to our festival to see these kind of films. So yeah, that's the answer.
And to add to what Lalit just said, if you are going to make films and documentaries, please do make them sustainably. We have had to talk about that earlier on today. Sustainability is possible within the film industry. David, so what I'm wondering now is, we know climate change is happening, and it has already happened and is continuing on, but do you think the mindset of people now is like, well, it's already happened, we've done our bit, we don't need to do any more? Do you think that's where people are at now, or can we encourage more change?
Well, I don't think that's where we're at the moment. I mean, it's a matter of, to a certain extent, damage limitation, but you can limit an awful lot of damage. And I talk about energy things, and there are some very specific things that one can call, ask for, expect to be done. We've got very limited time here, but I'll just choose one thing amongst many, which is a hobby horse of mine, I suppose, and that is heat pumps, which are extremely energy efficient and will reduce the energy consumption in an average house by around 70%. That's for the heating and hot water heating part, which is the main part of energy consumption in a house. Now, at the moment, the way things are done, they're quite expensive to retrofit in old homes. They should certainly be implemented in new homes as a matter of course. The government has been very slow to insist on this because they're very cheap to install in new homes for a range of technical reasons. I mean, I can see somebody yawn. But seriously, this is massively, this sort of thing is massively important, and it's where individual action and government local policies meet up, because we need to make it easier and more affordable for people to do things. I think this is possible, for instance, by giving an obligation on energy supply companies to have heat pumps fitted, and then they will have an incentive to do it most cheaply. At the moment, the system doesn't guarantee this, and we need action at a local level with people. This would be ideally, but I think this is possible, as they've done in Denmark, forming cooperatives to get heat networks established so that you can get large heat pumps serving lots of different buildings and houses, with, of course, local government having greater ability to borrow money to help all this. But that's just one thing, specific thing. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm aware that perhaps people might think it's a sort of middle class problem, really, the way we're talking about, because we're talking about, you know, people investing a lot of money in different ways of using energy. But that isn't the case with water, because we all need water. It's certainly not a middle class problem. And I gather you do a lot of wild swimming, Jackie. So, you know, can you tell us, are there any fears around that with regard to water pollution?
Yes, I think there's a lot of fears around wild. I mean, some people have been wild. Obviously, we all expect, I think, you know, as a nation, we expect to be able to go to the seaside and to swim in the sea. There's also been a huge uptake more recently in swimming in rivers and lakes and other wild places, which is a lovely thing to do. But yes, people do worry about, and of course the publicity has now happened the last 2 years in particular. It's been like, oh yes, but what about the sewage discharge? This is really putting people off, isn't it? And there is a real danger. I mean, just recently in the Oxford-Cambridge boat race, and I can't remember whether it was the Oxford crew or the Cambridge crew. I think it was the Oxford crew, because they'd been practicing rowing in the Thames, and they hadn't been swimming in the Thames. They had literally been rowing in the Thames, but obviously they get water splashback and that sort of thing. And several of the crew went down with water-related diseases, things like dysentery and E. coli infections and that sort of thing. So they still took part, but they lost the boat race. So this could have massive implications. And the other thing is, obviously we know recently the big scandal in Brixham, that suddenly tap water isn't even safe to drink. This is because, and I sort of have inside knowledge of this because one of my very best friends actually worked for Thames Water for a long time, and we were there when the water companies were nationalised. And at that point, what he told me was that in order to make profits bigger, to pay the shareholders more, they stopped routine maintenance. So what they used to do is to repair pipes routinely. If there was, I don't know, 100 miles of pipes, they'd do 10 miles a day or whatever it was, until all the pipe work was renewed over a period of time. They stopped doing that, and they just went for if there was a leak, trying to fix the leak, and renewing it when it broke, in other words, instead of keeping it maintained. And the result of that is that this leakage that happened to a pipe well, the water supply that was going to Brixham, the pipe rusted away or got a hole in it or whatever it did, and water was seeping in from nearby field which had cattle in it, and this caused everybody that was drinking the tap water in Brixham to become sick, and some of the children ended up in hospital. So it is really, really serious in terms of the sicknesses that can be spread by water. And to be honest, we thought we'd got rid of that after Victorian days. And I think, you know, okay, people couldn't go and get their water because of from pumps in Victorian days because of dysentery and typhoid and paratyphoid and all these other waterborne diseases. We thought we'd got beyond that, and now we've gone back to Victorian times.
I think the whole thing is a really difficult situation. I mean, you know, I know that people are upset. I'm from Bromsgrove. They're upset there about the number of potholes in the road. People are upset about a variety of things. And I think that we're all focusing on one little bit, and actually there is a bigger picture here, you know, and in repairing something, we are creating jobs, but sometimes those jobs go against what we're trying to do in terms of saving energy or saving the planet or saving water. How do we look at this problem, this whole climate problem, from air pollution to water pollution to the seas being polluted to plants dying to animals dying, our ecosystem changing? How do we look at the entirety of the problem and not separate it into little individual things? Because my fear is that in sorting out one little individual thing, we might have an impact on something else. How do we resolve it across the board? And this is to either of you.
Well, I think David might be better at answering that. I think that the simple answer really is that there's a lot of big business and very rich people are involved in making money out of various things. And I think David knows more about it than I do.
Yes, the Western big corporations are busy and have been busy defending their own interests, and when they are consulted as part of the government, what the basic response is, we want to carry on doing more of the same with a couple of pipes somewhere or something like that. And well, if you look at China, well, yes, we know we've got a terribly repressive government which imprisons dissidents and represses minorities and does lots of awful things. But if you look at the Chinese people in opinion polls, they've actually come out, and I've researched about this, and actually much keener, this is average Chinese people, much keener on tackling climate and general air pollution problems, because they've got a lot in China, than your average British or American person. And this is amazing but true, and this has impelled the Chinese government, as bad as they are in some respects, to organise radical industrial restructuring. And we know they're still dependent on oil, coal and so on, but they have really put enormous boosts behind new green technologies. We saw it first with solar PV, which is why it's so cheap around the world. It was first the European markets opened up. This was bottom-up pressure because people wanted incentives to be given to put solar farms in fields and on houses and so on. And the Chinese governments at various levels put up factories to do this, and they did a marvellous cost reduction job with the Western companies and so on wanting tariffs against Chinese imports. And we're seeing the same with batteries and electric vehicles. They're becoming incredibly cheap. It was just, I'll tell you, it was just up to the Chinese companies. People would be buying a lot more electric vehicles simply because they're cheaper. But the big Western corporations, for instance, car manufacturers, are putting up barriers to this sort of thing happening. Now, that traces back to what people want and people pressure. So it does matter. And it has to be pressure for specific things, really, rather or the demonstrations and so on do help, but we need to get active in very specific ways, I think. So really we're being too complacent in the West, and in some ways the Chinese people, say, in that sense, have put us to shame, to be honest.
So just one of the things that I will say is that certain groups have been quite active in taking the government to court about various things, and Friends of the Earth, and they're supported by. Do you know the group that it's a legal group that supports Friends of the Earth?
Client Earth.
Client Earth, yes, exactly. So Client Earth and the Friends of the Earth recently took it to court to say that the government are not keeping up to the standards that they should be doing. So this sort of people pressure will work eventually because there are people prepared to take it to court. There need to be more people, obviously. We need to spread the word.
I'm going to ask a really sad question now. Do you think we have to sink a little bit lower? Do things have to get a little bit worse in Britain before the vast majority of people wake up and say, right, now is the time? Because from what you're saying about China was that China was in a very polluted scenario and that it's the people who have changed it. And I'm not sure whether all of our society in Britain are fully on board with this. Does it need to get a bit worse before it gets better?
Well, I think it's getting better in the sense that pressure from a variety of angles and technological change is making energy transitions easier. I think we have the tools with advanced industries such as wind power onshore and offshore, solar power of various types of energy efficiency technologies, again of various sorts, which are being developed. We talked about, I mentioned batteries and EVs. So in that sense, it's getting easier. There are other technologies which we ought to be supporting more than we are, whether it be tidal stream technology or some types of geothermal technology, wave power, etc., etc. But we already actually have a lot of the tools, and it is actually easier to get on with the job. So I'm optimistic in that sense, that it's easier to get on with the job than the large majority of people who want to tackle this issue, albeit they don't want to sacrifice the whole of their lives to do it perhaps. But it is getting easier. So I'm reasonably optimistic. We are going to make progress, despite the scepticism you hear from some quarters.
So, final question from me before I open it up to the floor for any questions. If you had our current or future government in front of us right now, what would you say to them?
Get together a decent heat house programme that delivers it cheaply, with the low-hanging fruit getting implemented first. Well, not specifically. There are lots of other things that need to be done as well.
Yes, I would say invest now and heavily in alternative technology for electricity, and also invest again. We desperately need investment in the water companies, or they don't need investment. They need to claw some back from their shareholders. I think that's a moot point. But do something about the problems that we're having. Will give people jobs, and it will also very quickly we can be I believe that Scotland have already been several times on totally on alternative electricity. So we can do it, and it's not that hard. They're just making it sound harder than it is. So get your act together, government, and don't listen to the oil companies.
Also, just change your name, call yourself My Name is Climate. Please connect emotionally, mentally. First thing is that. If you can't do it now, at least do it for your children's. So to all education sector, I like to say, bring as a curriculum for children's. So they will grow with this, like you do for different languages, foreign language and different activities. So put some energy, education sector, please put some energy on this so children will learn from beginning and they grow with this. And apart from that, all of the filmmakers, try to produce your film in a sustainable way. So that's what I like to say. Thank you.
Yes, you can read books as well. You can buy my book, published by Pluto Press. You buy it here for just £10, although it'll cost just a little bit more from Pluto Press. Energy Revolutions, Profiteering versus Democracy by me, David Toke. Sorry, David, my name is Climate Toke.
Thank you. Before we move on to the awards ceremony, do we have any questions from the audience?
In a similar way that rail passengers get money back if the train's delayed, can the water consumers be given a refund when their water is measured and certain levels haven't been met? Can they be forced to the water company to pay compensation to their reuser?
Any thoughts on that, Jackie?
Well, it would be nice if they could, but again, I think it's got to be government control. I know that there've been a lot of things going out to Ofsted or Ofcom, I'm not never sure which one, it's Ofcom, isn't it, about water quality and fining companies. And they do fine the water companies, but they fine them piddly little amounts that they don't take any notice of. So, yes, it would be lovely if it could happen. And it would be lovely if we could get a government that really tackled the problem by saying, you've got to produce clean water, otherwise we will fine you very heavily.
I think it would be quite interesting to see and to know as well where that fined money goes to. Does it go back into solving the problem, or does it go into some other government coffer? So maybe we need a bit more transparency in general. Any other questions?
Thank you very much for the very wide-ranging and sort of concise views of where we are, what needs to happen. Interesting to have the examples of, one hand, heat pumps and then of water pollution as areas of where action is needed. In media, there's been such a rallying behind that sewage outfalls has been a sort of a cause of popular media. It's really engaged people, whereas with heat pumps you've got an exception of sort of national press, right-wing papers that have been so hostile. And I wonder why that is. I mean, is this because of certain industry actors and sort of PR pushing a certain line? Is it because the technology sort of confuses people, it sort of seems too good to be true and it needs to be explained better? But I'd be interested in both David and Jackie's view on that and how we address it.
Well, my own view is there's a lot of it is really generated by naysayers, people who've never been 100% with the climate change agenda or anywhere near 100%. And when you get activists spreading negative interpretations, particularly when you've got quite a few of them, well, of course, this saps confidence. That would be my explanation. I think there's too much negativity, and we've got to persuade and convince them to change their mind and others not to follow them.
Jackie, do you have anything to say?
Well, my opinion is, as with an awful lot of problems, that people don't seem to, some people have obviously, professors, university people who are working on these sort of things can look ahead and far seeing. Other people only seem to recognise a problem when it comes forward and kind of slaps them in the face. And it's, oops, my home's got flooded this year, that wasn't nice, you know. And now I can't insure my house anymore because it's going to flood again. This is a problem to them. So I think that certain issues, and yet still they probably don't necessarily associate it with climate change. So we've got to get, they've got to make that connection. And secondly, it's when things start to affect people absolutely, like in Bangladesh when they've got a major flood and their houses are all underwater, then this has become, and if sea levels rise due to global warming, then for some nations they will disappear altogether. There are nations in the Pacific Islands who will disappear. And this obviously is a problem for them. You know, they're going to sink underwater. This is a major problem. I don't think that heat pumps is a problem for people. And as such, they aren't looking to solve it. The problem that people are having with their gas and electricity is that it has got quite expensive. And if they can solve it by being offered a cheaper alternative, then that would make it more popular. So first of all, people have got to recognise that they personally have got a problem, and that if something's not done collectively, as somebody said, for their children and their grandchildren, then the problem is these problems are not going to go away. They are only going to get worse.
On the subject of affordability, I very much agree with Jackie. We've got to make things affordable. And you do sometimes hear, putting solar power panels on your roof, buying electric cars, or fitting heat pumps. This is something that is for rich people. I'd actually turn that round and I'd say, well, if people have got a bit of spare cash, they damn well ought to be doing these things. That's the way I say it. Because, you know, with what we now see as essential technology, how did that start off with? Fridges weren't originally owned by ordinary people. They started off being bought by rich people. We didn't complain about that. So they saw it as a status practical commodity. We should see green technologies at a personal level. So the government's got to do policies and so on to help this, of course. We should see green energy technologies as almost an obligation for people who can afford it.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm actually going to answer your question as well because, and I'm allowed to say this, as a working class Glaswegian, I kind of have a slightly different viewpoint, I guess, because of my origins and where I'm at now. So the air source heat pump is a really relevant topic for me because although I'm not an engineer and I'm not a technical person, I have looked into this a lot because I'm in a situation where I have a house that's off-grid. It doesn't have natural gas going into it, so it's something that I have to consider. And the conclusion I've come to is the water scenario, water pollution, affects everybody. Everybody knows it affects them. The air source heat pump thing doesn't. Right? It's very much a class-considered thing. And I think, to answer your question, the idea is that certain newspapers which have affiliated themselves with certain sections of society, certain classes of society, are leaning into that. And that's how I see it. I think the air source heat pump, yes, definitely saves people money if they have one installed, but the cost of having it installed is about £15,000. Right? That's a lot of money. And you can use a lot of electricity on other things before you run up a bill of £15,000. So I think it's a financial thing and it's a class thing. And I think, in all honesty, if you are living in a 2-bedroom flat or in a council property or something small, have the whole idea of an air source heat pump or solar panels will just go right over your head. It's inappropriate for your scenario, but it isn't and it shouldn't be.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
A story about a working class pensioner couple in southeast Birmingham who've had a one household with an air source heat pump installed through the government grant scheme, which the Baltimore Heath and Acox Green campaigners yielded, and they're delighted with it. Colin said it's the best thing that's ever been invented.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is the way forward. It is literally the reverse of a fridge. You know, it does the opposite of a fridge. But I think it's a class and it's a financial thing, and that unfortunately brings us back to government incentives and everything else. Any further questions from the audience?
I've got two. One was around there's no mention of nuclear anywhere. And I'm just curious of people's opinion on that, because I know there was some interesting stuff a while back. I haven't looked into it more recently because I was kind of engineer into sort of small pebble bed stuff. Like, I don't know, I'm just curious if that comes up.
So just to reiterate that in case we haven't caught it on the microphone, the question is about nuclear
Is
energy.
there a role of nuclear?
And is there a role for nuclear energy in our future?
Well, I say that this is at best a distraction, because in the West, nuclear power is a bit of a historical dinosaur, because it involves the idea of having a mass, cheap industrial labour force working to much laxer health and safety at work standards. I'm not even talking about nuclear safety standards here, for constructing things. And you can do this up to a point. It's still fairly expensive in the past, but it's now become virtually impossible in the West to deliver these things at any reasonable cost or on time. And of course, these so-called new designs were all things that were abandoned in the 1950s and 1960s, and they tried to make larger power stations because that was a cheaper way of doing it. So going back and trying to make them smaller with these abandoned designs isn't going to help. I mean, I could give you a much longer answer to that.
Yes, personally, I have always been against nuclear power. I think that well, we've found out recently it's extremely expensive. You compare the cost of building a nuclear power station to putting up offshore wind farms, there's no comparison. And therefore, if we can get energy cheaper without having loads of radiation floating around somewhere, then obviously that would be much, much better. So I've never understood why anybody is pushing forward with nuclear power. The other side of it is that, in fact, I was just reading the other day about the problems that they're still having with nuclear waste. That they don't mention this very much. It used to be a hot topic in the 60s, 70s, 80s, enormously hot topic about where is this nuclear waste going to go. They've done nothing about it. It's still a problem. And they were talking about, I don't know, putting it in some great bunker in the sea or something like that. It's not an answer. Sometime it's going to leak and it's going to cause problems. And finally, what nobody seems to realise, but with the amount, we haven't got a peaceful world at the moment. We've got wars simmering in all sorts of places. Having a nuclear power station near you makes you a nuclear target. It makes you a target. It doesn't have to be a nuclear bomb, because if it's dropped on a nuclear power station, you're going to get massive radiation released.
Do we want nuclear power stations in Sudan? Because if you want to roll this out as a global solution, that's what it means.
And your second question?
Yeah, the second one was more at the start of when we introduced my Danish climate, was talk about mindfulness.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if the stuff we're talking about, it's like we should be attacking it at the other end, because it's about mindsets, and it's like you're not going to change some people's mind. Like, it's about seeding that in the next generation. And
So should we be looking at changing
I mean,
mindsets as well as mindfulness,
one of
Lalit?
the big problems.
Yeah, mindset, definitely that is the first target, and we have to prepare them, and then we have to bring them in a ceremony, and then so that's how we start actually. So bringing somebody to, it's like a chain smoker, and how many times doctor try to change that person, and some people, they don't want to change, and it have to come from inside actually. That's the main thing. So we have so many different tricks, and we're going to apply everything. We have our weapons, so we'll try our best to change mindset. Yeah.
Great. And any final questions from the audience? Okay, we are going to move on to presenting our certificates. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to David, and to Jackie, and to Lalit.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Just stay there. I'm going to take a picture. So,
Yeah.